Hey, Gail.
Well, Dallas, you mentioned barriers, and I want to just explore that a little bit, because it's a little easier for us to see how the Pharisees set up barriers. But we set up barriers in our own life and in our communities of faith. And let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, that's a real problem, and partly it's defensiveness. We want to protect ourselves from others, and so we don't allow ourselves to get near and to look at others and say, I want to be with that person. God is with me, I can be with them. That's one of the things that so characterized Jesus and enabled him to live in this amazing generosity. You know, I just like to kind of run in my mind what that scene looked like when he was sitting there. He's telling stories, and he was having a good time with these folks. Jesus was so with God that he could be anywhere. He could be with anybody. And he was constantly being judged. And I think, really, Margaret, that we internalize that. And we're kind of judging ourselves. And we're thinking in terms of being acceptable to people. And one of the things about being with God is you have to accept not being acceptable to people.
And that's hard for us.
It's hard, and especially because it's often people we love very much.
Yeah. And Gail, on the college campus, this idea of being accepted, and you must see that all the time.
Well, we do. But I think it's, as I was thinking about Dallas's comments, I was reminded of something I've wondered about from time to time, and it is that different denominations do different parts of the Christian life better than other parts.
Yes.
And I don't know that this could ever happen, but it seems like if you took developmental faith seriously, and you would have people who are good at conversion, start people, and then pass people on who are good at discipleship. And then keep going up to, because what you're talking about is a very high developed faith.
That's right.
Where people live out of this awareness of Christ and they respond to it regardless of their circumstances. And it's a highly differentiated person who could do that, and not a person who has just entered the faith.
That's great language. A highly differentiated person.
Yes. Dallas, I got it from you.
What that really means is practicing the presence of God, I think.
Well, I think it's hard because I believe in organizations, but there's a point at which organizations end up stifling faith. And so many people who come to a conference like this have in one way or another experienced the stifling presence of the church as they've sought after Christ. And so how do you utilize the resource of the church, the one organization that's placed here by God, to benefit humanity? And then how do you move beyond it?
Well, I think I think really the answer is very simple, actually. And that is, we say that our primary initiative in the church is to love God with all our heart and to just worship and love him, and then love our neighbor, which is the person next to us, as much as we love ourselves, and actually as much as Jesus loved us. And if we make that primary, then I think all the organizational issues will pull themselves, And then we can say, well, but I won't be able to raise funds if I associate with this person or reach out.
What if you just don't like them?
There's a different treatment for that. Actually, getting close to people is one way of learning to like them.
Yeah, that's for sure.
It really is true.
That's true.
And sometimes they're very unpleasant and very unlike us and so on. But that's where standing in the kingdom allows us to be anywhere comfortably.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of that, Juanita, in just a few sentences, can you tell us about your church? Because I mean,
No.
if you can't, I will, but I mean, it is a place where many of us would not feel comfortable because many are homeless and they look different and they smell different, and yet there is such a spirit and an awareness of God's presence that is there in their worship service. But you've had to learn, I think, how to love people who, for most of us, would be unlovable.
Oh boy, you know, I remember when we began our church, we started with 9 members, and our congregation has grown now to about 9,000 members. We have 3,000 of those members who have no address. And I remember as I would go out and talk to other churches, because in the beginning days we had no funding.
Oh, yes.
And we provided meals to the homeless community because we saw that when we actually walked into the sanctuary, actually into the entryway of the church, we literally had to walk over men and women who were sleeping in the doorway of our church. The denomination, I'm United Methodist, was about to close our church because it had dwindled down to these 9 people, and of course they couldn't afford to care for the building and so forth. But when we walked in and had to step over someone who was sleeping in the doorway, God said, "This is your ministry." Now, for the seminary trained who spent all that money on theological education, there'd probably not be a great feeling hearing, "This is your ministry." But I have to say that I think Rudy and I had a sense that if God called us to serve the homeless community, He would empower us to be the kind of people we needed to be to make a difference in the lives of the people we were called to serve. My first Renovare group included a prostitute, a woman who had been sober for about 6 months, a flight attendant, and there were a couple of other regular people in it. People who lived in the suburbs and had a Sealy Posturepedic to sleep in at night. But what God has shown us through our experience at St. John's, and with, I like to say, the experience of the other,
Yeah.
I found that it is fear, false evidence appearing real, that keeps us from allowing the love of God to flow from us and into the heart of someone else.
Yes. Yes.
The first day that I served a meal, which we served it outside in the park, what's now a building, but was then a parking lot, I was passing out silverware as we were serving the meals, and as I'm standing there, God said to me, "That could be your father. That could be your brother. That could be your uncle." And so when He gave me that kind of perspective so early on, it was hard to think anything else other than they're God's children, so they're my brothers and my sisters, and they're my fathers and my uncles and my aunts, and those babies that stand in this line, they're my children too. And so I think the challenge for us in bringing the kingdom in the way that you talked about, Dallas, and in the way that's contagious, where in essence the depth within us and the love within us begins to overshadow onto the person next to us. And that is the beauty of what I have seen happen at St. John's. People coming from all walks of life, knowing that our church's mission and ministry is to provide services to the homeless community. But not only that, we have services to those who are HIV infected and affected, to children who are affected and infected with HIV and AIDS. We have a large community of hepatitis C individuals because of substance abuse. And so this with God life, I'm here to tell you, is contagious.